There's a quiet strategy spreading through American real estate circles that sounds almost illegal the first time you hear it. Dan T. Sell the asset, borrow against it, live off the borrowed money, and let the tax bill die with you. The pitch is seductive because it plays on a real structural feature of the U.S. system. Loan proceeds generally aren't treated as taxable income, and long-held assets can receive a step-up in basis at death, wiping out decades of unrealized gains for heirs. According to Canal Roebelt, this becomes a compounding loop when you combine appreciating property with aggressive tax planning, especially in niches like short-term rentals where depreciation rules can create large paper losses while the real-world cash flow still hits your bank account. And yes, the IRS itself explains that very short average stays can change how rental activity is treated under the passive activity framework. Details that can materially affect who can actually use those losses. But here's the urgent warning. Buy, borrow, die is not a magic trick. It's leverage, interest rate risk, refinancing risk, liquidity risk, and policy risk all stacked together. Used correctly, it can accelerate wealth. Used blindly, it can turn one market downturn or one bad loan renewal into a forced sale at the worst possible time. If you've spent any time around real estate investors lately, you've probably heard the phrase that sounds like a dare. Borrow until you die. The idea is simple, but the consequences are not. You buy an appreciating asset, you avoid selling it. You borrow against the equity for cash, and you try to keep the tax bill locked behind a door you never open. The reason it can work is embedded in tax mechanics that are very real. The IRS explains that when you borrow money, you generally don't include the loan proceeds in income because you have an obligation to repay. And the IRS also explains that inherited property's basis is generally stepped up to fair market value at the date of death, resetting the starting point for capital gains calculations. According to Canal Roebelt, the modern accelerant is real estate depreciation, especially when short-term rentals are operated in a way that can generate large paper losses. Early, sometimes paired with cost segregation to front-load deductions and keep more cash in your pocket. The IRS's passive activity rules also underscore why short stays matter. If the average period of customer use is 7 days or less, it can change how the activity is classified for tax purposes. But here's the warning. This strategy is not free money. It is leverage and policy risk in a trench coat. Bonus depreciation rules change, interest rates change, lenders change, terms, and one liquidity event can force the very sale you were trying to avoid. In this video, I'm going to break down what's real, what's hype, and what can quietly bankrupt the unprepared, so you can make decisions like an operator, not a spectator. If you want more documentary-style real estate deep dives like this, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what city and country you rewatching. From your support is what makes these investigations possible. For transparency, every data source cited in this video is listed in the description. The first step in borrow until you die isn't the borrowing. It's the decision to treat your real estate like a balance sheet, not a house. The strategy only works when the asset is built to do 3 jobs at once: produce cash flow, appreciate over time, and remain financeable enough that a lender will keep writing checks against it. That's why the borrow part is so tax efficient on paper. When you borrow money, you're not creating income, you're creating an obligation. The IRS explains this plainly in its guidance on foreclosure and debt cancellation. When you borrowed, you generally weren't required to include the loan proceeds in income because you had an obligation to repay the lender. This is the core insight. Selling triggers a taxable event. Borrowing generally does not. That's the door the strategy walks through. According to Canal Roebelt, most people see appreciation and immediately think sell and cash in. But the operator mindset is don't sell. In the transcripts example, the investor buys, lets tenants pay down the loan, waits for appreciation to build equity, and then uses a cash-out refinance to pull equity out without triggering capital gains. The concept is really even if the exact numbers vary widely by credit, lender, debt to income, property type, and market conditions. But here's what the viral versions often understate. This isn't a tax trick. It's a financing strategy that depends on credit conditions staying friendly. In a falling rate world, cash-out refinancing feels like a conveyor belt. In a rising rate world, it turns into a treadmill with a weight vest. The minute rates jump, your cost of capital rises, your debt service increases, and the strategy becomes a test of liquidity and underwriting discipline. The next step is the part that makes real estate uniquely powerful compared with many other assets. Depreciation. Unlike stocks, real estate can produce paper losses while still producing real cash flow, especially when investors accelerate depreciation using tools like cost segregation. According to Canal Roebelt, the supercharger is bonus depreciation paired with cost segregation, creating large first-year paper losses that may offset other taxable income for taxpayers who meet the rules. The mechanism is plausible, but only in the right fact pattern, and the rules are not optional. This is where short-term rentals enter the picture. The IRS explains in Publication 925 that an activity is not treated as a rental activity for passive activity purposes if the average period of customer use is 7 days or less. The IRS also reiterates those exceptions in the Form 8582 instructions. Again, calling out the 7 days or less threshold. Investor-focused outlets have been pushing this aggressively because it can change how losses are characterized when the owner materially participates. BiggerPockets, for example, describes the STR loophole as a way for some investors to treat depreciation losses as active rather than passive, potentially offsetting W-2 income if they meet the participation standards. Tax specialist real estate advisors echo the same concept, with the caution that documentation and participation tests are where deals live or die. Now connect the dots. If you can create deductions early, retain more cash, and avoid selling, you can reinvest faster, compounding your portfolio. According to Canal-Robelt, this becomes a relentless cycle of buy, grow, borrow, buy again, repeating without triggering the tax reset button of a sale. And then we arrive at the part few people say out loud. The die component is not about borrowing at all, it's about basis. Bloomberg Tax has argued that the real linchpin of the strategy is step up in basis, because it can make a lifetime of unrealized gains disappear from the capital gains tax roll when assets transfer at death. The legal foundation for that concept is in Section 1014, which generally sets the basis of inherited property to fair market value at death. That's the opportunity and the trap. The opportunity is tax-efficient compounding. The trap is mistaking compounding for safety. You're building a machine that runs on debt, refinancing access, and stable property operations. If any one of those breaks, rates spike, occupancy drops, lenders tighten, local STR rules change, you can be forced into the one action the strategy was designed to avoid: selling under pressure. In the next chapter, we'll talk about the risk, stack interest rate risk, policy risk, depreciation recapture, and the behavioral danger of believing a strategy is guaranteed just because it's popular. The borrow until you die playbook sounds clean in a studio, but in the real world, it lives or dies on two variables: U, Dan, T control, the cost of debt and the stability of the tax code. And right now, both are moving under your feet. Let's start with the most dangerous misunderstanding. According to the Canal-Robelt, the core mental model is that borrowed money is not income, so you can pull cash out via a cash-out refinance and keep it untouched by the IRS. That logic is directionally true. In plain English, loan proceeds generally aren't taxable just because they reloan proceeds, but the market punishes people who confuse not taxable today with free. Debt has a price, and in 2025, that price has been volatile. According to the Associated Press reporting on Freddie Mac's weekly survey, mortgage rates were still hovering in the 6% range late in the year, with the 30-year average dipping to around 6.15% at one point. In other words, the tax-free cash you pull out isn't free at all. It's a long-duration bet on your future cash flow, future occupancy, future expenses, and your ability to refinance again before you get squeezed. Now layer on the second lever, home equity lending. A lot of viewers here tap equity and assume HLOCs are a gentle, flexible option. But HLOCs are usually variable rate instruments. According to bank rate surveys of major lenders, average HELOC rates were still in the mid to high 7% range around late 2025. If you're rebuilding a strategy that relies on repeatedly borrowing against depreciation, a variable rate line can turn your plan into a stress test overnight. When your carrying costs jump, you don't just lose profit, you lose time. And time is the invisible ingredient in every real estate tax strategy, because time is what lets cash flow stabilize. Let's ADR seasonality even out, and let's refinance windows open. Then there's the tax supercharger itself. According to the Canal-Robelt, the engine that helps W-2 earners start the snowball is the short-term rental reclassification, combined with bonus depreciation paper losses that can offset W-2 income if you materially participate. But the size of that supercharger is a policy variable, not a law of nature. Under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, bonus depreciation was designed to phase down over time, and the IRS-owned TCJA explicable describes that phase-down structure. At the same time, tax industry analysis in 2025 has argued the opposite direction. Thomson Reuters Tax Commentary describes a 2025 law change that would reinstate 100% bonus depreciation for qualifying property acquired and placed in service after a specific January 2025 date, with transitional percentages for earlier 2025 placements. That tension is the point. Your strategy can be legal and still be politically fragile. Operators should treat these benefits the way they treat insurance markets, available until they aren't, and repriced faster than you expect. Now let's talk about the part the internet glosses over: the exit bill. Depreciation isn't magic. It's timing. When you accelerate deductions, you're pulling tax benefits forward and often increasing the complexity of your future sale. The IRS explicitly flags that gain attributable to depreciation can face the unrecaptured Section 1250 gain rate, capped at 25%, and may also be exposed to the net investment income tax in certain cases. So if your long-term plan is never sell, that SA bet that you'll always have lenders ready to refinance you and that your heirs will inherit under rules that remain favorable. And that brings us to the third lever, step up in basis. The Canal Robuilt frames step up as the reset button the wealthy use so heirs can sell without being taxed on decades of gains. The risk is that step up has become a recurring target in policy debates. Analysts and policy organizations have openly discussed proposals to limit or end stepped-up basis for certain taxpayers or above certain thresholds. And 2025 has been a focal point for broader tax reform discussions tied to expiring TCJA provisions. You don't have to predict politics to manage political risk. You just have to admit that a strategy built on one tax rule lasting forever is a strategy with a single point of failure. Here's the human side, because this isn't just a rich person trick. Housing wealth is one of the largest stores of middle-class security in America. According to Investopedia's reporting on 2025 data, older Americans hold enormous home equity, and many are increasingly carrying mortgage debt later in life. Used conservatively, leverage can keep families in place, fund healthcare, help a small landlord renovate aging housing stock, and stabilize neighborhoods. Used aggressively, it can turn the home, the supposed safety net, into a fragile tower of refinancing dates, variable rate resets, and regulatory headlines. So the real lesson in 2025 is not do it or do it. It's this: if you're going to play the borrow and compound game, you need to underwrite your own life the way a cautious lender would. Assume refinancing windows close. Assume expenses rise. Assume occupancy drops at the worst possible moment. Assume the tax code changes at the exact point your plan needs it most. That's the difference between a strategy and a gamble. The borrow until you die strategy sits at the intersection of three real forces: America's preference for asset-based wealth, the tax code's treatment of borrowing and basis, and the financial system's willingness to lend against appreciating collateral. Used with discipline, it can be a legitimate wealth-building framework. Used with hype, it becomes a slow-moving trap. Here's what is undeniably real. The IRS explains that loan proceeds generally guarantee included in income at the moment you borrow because you have an obligation to repay. The IRS also explains that inherited property's basis is generally stepped up to fair market value at death, resetting the capital gains starting point for heirs. That's the architecture behind buy, borrow, die. And according to Bloomberg Tax, the step up at death is the linchpin that can make the never sell endgame work for many families. Here's what is fragile. Debt costs change, lending standards tighten, and the rules that make depreciation so powerful can shift. The IRS TCJA explicable describes how bonus depreciation was designed to phase down, and tax industry coverage in 2025 has argued for policy moves that could restore 100% bonus depreciation. For certain property, proof that this is a moving target, not a permanent guarantee. And the moment you accelerate depreciation, you re-often building a future sale bill. The IRS highlights that depreciation-related gain can be taxed as unrecaptured Section 1250 gain, capped at 25%, which means a paper loss today can translate into real tax exposure later if you sell. So here are the practical lessons. If you're a consumer using this to build financial stability, treat leverage as a tool, not an identity. Keep liquidity reserves that assume a bad year vacancy, repairs, insurance spikes, and a refinancing window that shuts. Favor fixed-rate structures when possible, because variable-rate debt can turn a tax strategy into a cash flow emergency. If you're an operator, document everything: material participation, STR usage patterns, cost segregation support, and clean bookkeeping, because tax strategies don't fail only in court, they fail in audits, underwriting reviews, and refinancing renewals. When you borrow against equity, underwrite to a higher rate and lower revenue than you think you'll get. And most importantly, do not build your entire plan on one political assumption. Step up in basis is a cornerstone today, but it's also a recurring policy target in tax reform debates. The difference between a resilient wealth plan and a brittle one is whether it still works if one rule changes. So here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. If the tax code and credit markets are both moving, what happens to borrow until you die? When refinancing dries up or step-up rules get narrowed, who wins and who gets trapped? If this breakdown helped, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what city and country you're rewatching. From your support is what makes these investigative real estate videos possible. And for transparency, every data source cited in this video is listed in the description.